The hall was made of white stone that seemed to glow from within, and it was built for beings who did not sweat, did not shake, and did not feel fear the way humans did. Ambassador Lena Cho stood in the center of that hall, alone, while 5 alien delegates looked down at her from their high seats. She kept her hands still at her sides. She had trained herself for years not to let her hands shake, not even now. "The human fleet command is hereby dissolved," said the lead counselor, a tall being with gray skin and no visible eyes, only a smooth band of light across its face. Its voice came out flat and even, translated by a small device that made it sound almost gentle. "All human warships, carriers, and armed vessels above Class 3 are to be decommissioned within 1 standard cycle. Humanity may retain unarmed transport and mining vessels only." Lena had known this was coming. Everyone on Earth had known, ever since the Battle of Kessa's Reach, when a fleet of only 12 human ships had destroyed 40 Vorak raiders, and then, 3 days later, turned and destroyed a Council peacekeeping squadron that got in the way. It had been a mistake. A terrible, bloody mistake, born from bad communication and worse luck. But the Council did not care about reasons. The Council cared about control. "Council Elder," Lena said, choosing her words with care. "Humanity acted to defend a border colony from Vorak raiders. The peacekeeping squadron was struck by accident, in the chaos of battle. We have already paid reparations. We have already apologized before this body 3 times. Is this ban truly necessary?" The counselor's light band flickered, which Lena had learned was the alien version of a slow blink. "Necessary is not the correct word, Ambassador. It is not about necessity, it is about the numbers." A screen appeared in the air above the council table, showing a chart that Lena had seen many times before in nightmares. It showed kill ratios. Human ships, ship for ship, gun for gun, outperformed every other council species by a wide margin. Human pilots reacted faster. Human commanders made bolder choices. Human engineers built weapons that should not have worked as well as they did, and yet they worked. "Your species has existed among the stars for less than 100 years, the counselor continued. "In that time, you have proven yourselves more dangerous, ship for ship, than any species this council has ever recorded, including the Vorak themselves. We did not survive 10,000 years of peace by allowing new species to grow into the kind of power that ends peace. This is not punishment, Ambassador Cho. This is caution." Lena wanted to argue that humanity was not a threat to the Council. She wanted to say that Earth had never once attacked a Council world, that humans only fought when attacked first, that the numbers on that chart came from desperation, and not from any wish for conquest. But she had said all of this before, in other rooms, to other counselors, and it had never mattered. The Council did not fear what humanity had done. They feared what humanity might become. "There is a second matter," the counselor said, and Lena's stomach tightened, because a second matter was never good. "The Vorak have grown bolder in the last cycle. 3 border worlds report increased raids. Species Council forces are already stretched. Your ban does not include this Council's protection duties toward Earth and her colonies. That protection will continue to be provided, as it always has, by the combined fleet." Lena almost laughed, though nothing about this was funny. The combined fleet was a joke wrapped in good intentions. It was made of ships from a dozen species, none of whom fought the way humans fought, none of whom moved fast enough or hit hard enough to truly stop the Vorak when they came in force. Everyone on that council knew it, and still they smiled their strange smiles, if they had mouths at all, and told her that Earth would be protected. "Thank you, Council Elder," Lena said, because there was nothing else to say. "I will inform Earth of your decision." She left the White Hall with her back straight and her steps even, and she did not let herself feel anything until she was alone in her shuttle, halfway back to the human embassy station, when she finally put her face in her hands and allowed herself 3 long, shaking breaths. 2 months later, on Earth, in a small office building outside the city of Denver that had once belonged to an aerospace company and now belonged to what remained of Human Fleet Command, a woman named Dr. Maya Reyes sat across a table from a man she had once served under and had not seen in almost a year. Commander Ethan Cole looked older than he had at Kessa's Reach. There was more gray in his short beard, and his eyes had the tired look of a man who had spent too many nights thinking about things he could not change. He had commanded the human fleet during the battle that started all of this. He had given the order that destroyed the Council peacekeeping ships, though it had been an accident of timing and bad sensor data, not intent. The council had never charged him with anything, because there was nothing to charge him with under law. But they had taken his fleet away all the same, piece by piece, ship by ship, until there was nothing left for him to command. "They're really doing it," Maya said. She had a folder of papers in front of her, real paper, because she trusted paper more than she trusted networks these days. Every warship above Class 3, gone in 10 months. That's the Nighthawk carriers, the Sentinel line, all of it. We keep patrol boats and cargo haulers. "I read the order," Ethan said quietly. "Do you know what happens to a species with no way to defend itself, Ethan? The Vorak don't wait for permission to attack. They don't care what the council says humans are allowed to have. They'll come, and we'll have nothing but transport ships and prayers." Ethan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "The council isn't stupid, Maya. They know exactly what they're doing. They're not disarming us because they think the Vorak aren't a threat. They're disarming us because they're more afraid of us than they are of the Vorak." "That's insane." "That's politics," he said. "We beat 40 Vorak raiders with 12 ships." 12. The council has fought the Vorak for 200 years and never once had a victory like that. They looked at what we did, and they didn't see heroes. They saw a species that might, someday, decide the council itself is in the way. Maya was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the Colorado sky was a hard, clean blue, the kind of sky that made you forget, for a few seconds, that there were things out among the stars that wanted humanity gone or humanity tamed, and that the difference between those two things might not matter much in the end. "So what do we do?" she asked. "Roll over, hand over the fleet, and hope the Vorak stay on their side of the border?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data drive, the old-fashioned kind, not connected to any network, and set it on the table between them. "I've spent the last 2 months talking to people," he said. "Quiet people. People who used to work on classified projects before the council started watching everything we build. There's an idea. A crazy one. I want you to look at it before you decide I've lost my mind." Maya picked up the drive and turned it over in her fingers. "What kind of idea?" "The council can ban our warships," Ethan said. "They can send inspectors to check our shipyards. They can put sensors on every border and satellites over every colony. But they can only ban what they can see, Maya. What if we built something they couldn't see at all?" The idea, when Maya finally understood it, was so simple that it frightened her, and so difficult that it seemed impossible. Every council sensor system, from the smallest patrol drone to the massive detection arrays that ringed every major world, worked on the same basic principles. They looked for engine heat. They looked for the particular hum of a fusion drive. They looked for the shape of hulls reflecting radar and light. They looked for the chatter of communications, the flicker of shields, the pulse of weapons charging. Every warship in the galaxy, human or otherwise, gave off some combination of these signals, because that was simply what it meant to be a ship that moved and fought and talked to other ships. What if a ship didn't do any of that? What if a ship moved without an engine that anyone recognized, carried no weapons that anyone had ever built before, and spoke to no one at all while it worked? Such a ship would not be hiding from the council's sensors. It would simply not exist to them. It would be a shape the universe did not have a name for. Maya spent 3 days in her small apartment with the data drive, barely sleeping, filling page after page of real paper with sketches and equations. Ethan had gathered fragments, ideas from a dozen different engineers who had been quietly forced out of council-supervised projects over the years, each of them stumbling onto something and getting shut down before they understood what they'd found. A drive system that didn't burn fuel but bent space in tiny amounts, so small it left no heat signature at all, borrowed from a failed faster-than-light experiment that everyone had assumed was a dead end. A hull material, discovered by accident in a mining accident on an asteroid near Jupiter, that didn't reflect light or radar in any pattern the council's computers were trained to recognize, because it wasn't reflecting them the normal way at all. It was bending them around itself. A communication method using tight, narrow bursts of modulated gravity waves instead of radio or light, something so strange that no sensor array in council space was built to look for it, because nobody had ever built anything that used it before. None of these pieces had been enough on their own to build a working ship. Each project had been small, underfunded, quietly canceled when council inspectors got too curious. But together, If they could be made to work together, they might be enough to build something that had never existed before. A ship with no visible engine trail. A hull that returned false, empty readings to any sensor that looked at it. A voice that spoke a language no scanner in the galaxy was listening for. A ship the Council could not see at all. Maya went back to Ethan's small office 4 days later with her sketches, dark circles under her eyes, and a fire in them that Ethan hadn't seen since before the war. "It's insane," she said, dropping the papers on the table. "Half of this technology doesn't exist yet. We'd need people, real resources, a place to build it where no satellite, no drone, no nosy trader ship could ever see it. And if the Council finds out what we're doing before we finish, they won't just ban our warships. They'll ban us. All of us. Maybe worse." "I know," Ethan said. "But it might work," Maya said, and there was something almost like hope in her tired voice. "It's not impossible. It's just very, very hard." Ethan smiled for the first time in weeks. "Good, hard, I can work with. Impossible, I can't." They did not tell the government, not yet. Governments leaked, and leaks had a way of reaching Council ears faster than anyone expected, because the Council paid well for information, and there were always people willing to sell it. Instead, Ethan and Maya built their team one person at a time, in quiet rooms, over long dinners, always asking the same question before they told anyone anything real. Can you keep a secret, even if keeping it costs you everything? The first person they brought in was a young propulsion engineer named Wen Zhao, who had worked on the failed faster-than-light drive project that got shut down by Council inspectors 3 years earlier. Wen had never stopped thinking about the problem in the quiet hours of his ordinary, boring job repairing cargo ship engines at a station near the moon. When Ethan found him and explained, carefully, without giving away too much, what he was thinking about, Wen didn't ask about pay or danger or how long it would take. He only asked one question. "Do you actually think it can be done?" "I think we have to try," Ethan said, "because the alternative is standing here with our hands empty when the Vorak decide the border isn't a border anymore." Wen was in. The second person was harder to convince. Dr. Priya Nandan had been the lead materials scientist on the strange hull discovery from the asteroid mining accident, before the Council quietly pressured the mining company into shutting the research down and reassigning her to something safer, something they could watch. She was angry when Ethan found her, angrier than anyone Maya had met in years, and it took 2 long conversations before she agreed to even hear the plan. "You understand what happens if we're caught," Priya said, on their second meeting, sitting in a small, quiet coffee shop far from any government building. "This isn't like breaking a local law. This is defying the Galactic Council. They could isolate Earth completely, cut off every trade route, every alliance. They could leave us alone with the Vorak and just walk away and let it happen. Or they could decide, after they see what we built, that a species capable of this kind of quiet, careful genius is not a species to be feared and boxed in, but a species worth respecting as an equal. I don't know which way it goes, Priya. Nobody does. But I know what happens if we do nothing. We already know that story. It ends with human colonies burning, while the combined fleet arrives 3 days too late, because that's exactly what nearly happened at Kessa's Reach, before we broke the rules to stop it." Priya was quiet for a long time, turning her cup slowly on the table. "Fine," she said at last, "but I choose the team on the materials side. I'm not trusting this to anyone I haven't checked myself." By the end of that first year, the team had grown to 11 people, then 23, then just under 50, spread across 3 continents, and 1 hidden facility that did not appear on any official map. They called the project nothing at first, afraid that even a name might slip out in the wrong conversation. But late one night, after a small breakthrough in the gravity wave communication system, Wen looked at the rough shape they had sketched for the hull, a long, smooth, dark shape, with no visible seams, no gun ports, no glowing engine vents, and said the word that stuck. "It looks like a shadow," he said, "like something that isn't really there." Maya wrote it on the whiteboard that night, under the pile of equations and sketches, Umbra. The shadow project had a name. 6 months into the work, the first real crisis hit, and it came not from the Council, but from the enemy the Council was supposed to be protecting Earth from in the first place. News broke across every human network on the same terrible morning. A Vorak raiding fleet, larger than any seen in a decade, had struck the colony of New Halden, a mining settlement on the edge of human space with just under 4,000 people. The combined fleet, the multi-species force the Council had promised would protect Earth's colonies now that human warships were banned, had been 3 days away when the attack began. By the time the first combined fleet ships arrived, the Vorak raiders were gone, and New Halden's main dome was a scorched ruin. 900 people were dead. The rest were alive only because the colony's small, unarmed defense drones had managed to slow the attack just long enough for most of the population to reach the underground shelters. Ethan watched the news reports in his small office with his jaw tight and his hands clenched on the edge of the desk. Maya stood beside him, unable to speak. On the screen, a reporter stood in front of the wreckage of New Halden's main dome, describing what had happened in a flat, exhausted voice, while behind her, rescue workers pulled bodies from the rubble. 900 people, Ethan said quietly, when the report ended. 900 people who had absolutely nothing to defend themselves with, because we followed the Council's rules. Ethan, Maya said carefully, this is exactly what you said would happen. This proves you were right, but it also means the Council will be watching us even closer now. Every colony is going to want protection. Every voice on Earth is going to be shouting for warships, for real fleets, right out in the open, where the Council can see them, and shut it all down before it starts. Then it's a good thing, Ethan said, that we're not building something they can see. He turned away from the screen, and looked at the small model of the Umbra, sitting on the corner of his desk, a rough three-dimensional printout that Wen had made the week before, showing the ship's strange, smooth, shadow-dark shape. New Halden is why we can't stop, he said. It's why we can't slow down. Every day we spend arguing about whether this is worth the risk. Another colony sits out there with nothing but drones and prayers standing between it and the next raid. We finish this ship, we finish it, and we make sure it works, and then we decide what to do with it. But we are not standing still while our people die, because the Council decided we were too dangerous to be trusted with our own defense. Maya looked at the small model too, at its dark, seamless shape that seemed to swallow the light in the room instead of reflecting it. All right, she said. Then let's build it right. That night, word went out to every member of the small, scattered team, coded in careful, Erndre language, that would mean nothing to anyone listening in. The message was simple. New Halden had fallen. The work would continue, faster now, with everything they had. Because somewhere out past the edge of human space, the Vorak were not waiting for permission from the Galactic Council to decide that humanity was weak and unprotected, and ready to be taken apart one colony at a time. The Shadow Project had a name, a purpose, and now, for the first time, it had urgency burning underneath every line of code and every weld on the hull. Humanity had been told it could not have warships. Nobody had ever told them they could not build something the Council had never imagined, something that did not fit any rule ever written, because it did not exist in the eyes of the law at all. Somewhere in a hidden facility built into the rock of a small, forgotten asteroid far from any trade route, the first true section of the Umbra's hull was already taking shape, dark and silent, waiting for the day it would finally fly. The asteroid was called 4471 Kessler, on official star charts, a lump of rock and metal too small and too far off any trade lane to interest anyone. That was exactly why Ethan had chosen it. No mining company wanted it. No Council patrol bothered to map it closely. It was simply a piece of gray nothing floating in the dark, forgotten by everyone except the 53 people who now lived and worked inside it. They had spent the first 4 months just digging, cutting tunnels and chambers deep into the rock with quiet, slow tools that gave off almost no heat and almost no noise, because even mining equipment could be picked up by a careful enough sensor if it ran too hot or too loud for too long. Wen Zhao joked that they were building the galaxy's most expensive and most secret basement. Nobody laughed very hard, because it was mostly true, and because everyone in that basement knew what would happen to them if the Council ever found it. By the start of the second year, the main construction chamber was finished. A long, wide cavern carved from solid rock, cooled and pressurized, and lit with soft white light, with the half-built frame of the Umbra resting in its center like the skeleton of some enormous, sleeping animal. It did not look like any ship humanity had built before. There were no gun turrets. There were no engine pods sticking out from the hull. It was smooth, and long, and dark, shaped more like a flattened teardrop than anything with sharp edges, because Priya's team had discovered early on that sharp edges and flat panels were exactly the kind of shape that ordinary sensors were built to notice. A smooth, curved shape, covered in the strange new material they had started calling shadow skin, was much harder for a scanner to make sense of, because it simply didn't give the light or the radar anything solid to bounce off of and return home. "It's not that the shadow skin makes us invisible," Priya explained one evening to the newest members of the team, a group of 8 engineers who had just arrived after months of careful vetting. She stood in front of a large screen showing a diagram of the hull's layered structure. "Invisible isn't a real thing. Light still hits us. Radar waves still hit us. What the shadow skin does is bend that energy around the hull instead of bouncing it straight back. A little bit of it comes back, but it comes back so scattered, so faint, and shaped so strangely, that any sensor looking at us reads it as background noise, space dust. Nothing worth a second look." "And the engine?" one of the new engineers asked. "Even if the hull is quiet, an engine burning fuel is going to shine like a star to anybody watching for heat." Wen answered that one, standing up from his workbench with a proud, tired smile on his face. "That's why we're not using a normal engine," he said. "Come look." He led the group to a smaller side chamber, where a strange device sat mounted on a testing frame, a smooth ring about 3 meters across, made of dark metal, with thin gold lines running through it like veins. It did not look like any drive system any of them had seen in a textbook. "Every drive humans have ever built moves a ship by pushing something out the back," Wen said. "Fuel, plasma, whatever it is, you push it out one way, the ship goes the other way. That's simple physics, and it's also exactly what every sensor in Council space is built to detect, because it makes heat, and it makes light, and it makes a very particular kind of noise. This," he tapped the ring gently, "doesn't push anything out the back at all. It bends the space just in front of the ship, just a tiny, tiny amount, so small it takes almost a full minute to move us even a few meters. But it doesn't stop. It just keeps bending, over and over, thousands of times a second, and the ship falls forward into the space it just bent. No exhaust, no heat trail, no noise a normal sensor is built to catch." "How fast can it go?" someone asked. Wen's smile grew. "Slow to start, but once we get the full drive built and tuned, our projections say it can eventually move faster than most Council warp drives, without ever once looking like it's moving at all, to anyone watching from outside. It just isn't where it was a second ago, and there was never any sign it was about to leave." The room was quiet for a moment, as the new engineers took that in. Then one of them, a young woman named Aisha Bello who had left a promising career at a Council-supervised shipyard to join the project, spoke up. "That's not just a way to avoid detection," she said slowly. "That's a way to appear and disappear like a ghost. You could be right on top of an enemy fleet, and they'd never see you coming." "That's the idea," Ethan said, walking in from the main chamber, arms crossed, listening to the last part of the conversation. "But I want to be very clear with everyone in this room, new and old. We are not building a weapon of surprise attacks. We are building a shield, a way to defend our people when the Council's promises fail them, the way they failed New Halden. Everything about this ship, every choice we make, needs to come back to that one purpose. The moment we start dreaming about using this thing to strike first, we've lost the whole reason we started." The room nodded, quiet and serious, and Ethan let the silence sit for a moment, before he clapped his hands together and smiled. "Now, back to work. We've got a ship to build." The months that followed were the hardest of Maya's life, harder even than the war years, because during the war, there had been a clear enemy and a clear fight. Here, the enemy was patience, and the fight was against 1,000 tiny problems that refused to be solved. The drive worked in theory, and it worked in small tests, moving little unmanned test frames a few careful meters at a time, inside the safety of the asteroid's main chamber. But scaling it up to move an actual ship, one large enough to carry a crew and shields and whatever defenses they eventually decided to add, was another matter entirely. The first full-size drive ring cracked during testing, sending a spray of sparks across the chamber and nearly injuring 2 engineers, who hadn't gotten clear in time. The second one worked, barely, but it drained so much power that the ship's life support would have failed within 4 hours of continuous flight. Priya's shadow skin had its own problems. It worked beautifully against radar and ordinary light, scattering and bending both so well that a full-size test panel, mounted on the surface of the asteroid and pointed at a passing Council survey drone, had returned a sensor reading indistinguishable from empty rock. But the material was difficult to shape around curves, difficult to weld to itself without leaving thin seams that glinted under direct light, and worst of all, it slowly lost its strange bending properties if it got too cold, which was a serious problem for a ship meant to fly through the freezing dark of deep space. We need a way to keep the skin warm, without giving off a heat signature that ruins the whole point of building it, Priya said one night, exhausted, staring at data on a screen that refused to give her good news no matter how she looked at it. It's like trying to keep a fire lit without letting anyone see the smoke. It was Aisha, the young engineer who had left the Council shipyard, who found the answer 3 weeks later, half by accident. She had been studying old Council technical papers on thermal regulation, information that was public and boring, and that nobody had ever thought to apply to a stealth hull before, because nobody else in the galaxy was building a stealth hull. She found a method the Council used to keep sensitive equipment warm on the coldest survey ships, a system of tiny channels running just beneath the surface, carrying warmed fluid in a slow, steady loop that leaked almost no heat outward because the fluid itself was cooled again before it ever reached the skin's outer edge. It's not perfect, Aisha admitted, presenting her idea to Priya and Wen at 2 in the morning. The whole team gathered around her, bleary-eyed but suddenly wide awake. But it should keep the shadow skin warm enough to hold its properties, and the heat loss is small enough that it should blend into normal background radiation. We'd need to test it, but I think this could work. It did work, after 3 more months of adjustment, and slowly, piece by piece, problem by solved problem, the Umbra grew from a bare metal frame in a rock cavern into something that finally, unmistakably, looked like a ship. Word of the Vorak's growing boldness kept reaching the hidden asteroid, carried in careful, coded messages from Earth, and every piece of news made the work feel more urgent. 6 months after New Halden, a second colony, smaller and further out, was hit by a Vorak scouting raid. The combined fleet arrived in time to save most of the colony, but 3 combined fleet ships were destroyed in the fighting, and the news reports back on Earth were full of angry voices demanding that the Council reconsider the ban on human warships. The Council did not reconsider. Instead, they sent a formal statement, delivered by Lena Cho's office to every major news outlet on Earth, explaining that the combined fleet's response times would improve as more resources were allocated to the border, and reminding humanity, in careful diplomatic language, that the ban existed for the safety and stability of the entire galaxy, and that patience was expected. Ethan read that statement 3 times in his small office on 4471 Kessler, then set the tablet down very carefully on his desk, as if he was afraid of what he might do if he held it any longer. "They're not going to change their minds," he said to Maya, who sat across from him, reading her own copy of the statement. "Not after New Halden, not after this, maybe not ever. We are on our own, and we have been on our own since the day they signed that ban." "The ship isn't ready," Maya said quietly. "We're at least a year away from a full working prototype, maybe more, and even then, we need to test it properly, before we can trust it with real lives." "I know," Ethan said. "I'm not saying we rush. I'm saying we can't afford to slow down either. Every month we spend fixing small problems is a month some colony out on the border doesn't have. We need to think about what happens the day this ship actually flies, who commands it, what its first mission looks like, how we decide, as a species, what it even means to have something like this in our hands." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "You've been thinking about this." "Every night," Ethan admitted. "This ship could change everything, Maya. Not just for the Vorak border, for how the whole galaxy sees us. If we use it wrong, even once, if we use it to attack instead of defend, we prove every fear the Council ever had about humanity. But if we use it right, if we save people the combined fleet couldn't save, without the Council even knowing we were there, we prove something else entirely. We prove we can be trusted with power, because we chose not to abuse it." "That's a heavy thing to build a ship around," Maya said. "It's the only thing worth building it around," Ethan replied. The first real crisis of the project came not from a cracked drive ring or an unstable panel of shadow skin, but from a person, and it came just after the 2-year mark, when the Umbra's hull was finally whole, and the drive was finally strong enough to move the ship, slowly and carefully, through the wide-open chamber they had carved for testing. His name was Daniel Kessler, no relation to the asteroid's official designation. A young systems engineer who had joined the project 8 months earlier, recommended by a trusted colleague, vetted as carefully as everyone else. He worked hard, said little, and seemed, on the surface, exactly like the kind of quiet, dedicated person the project needed. It was Aisha who noticed something wrong first. A small, strange pattern in the outgoing communication logs from the asteroid's tightly restricted network. A burst of data sent out through an old maintenance channel that nobody should have been using, timed for the middle of the night when most of the crew was asleep. She brought it to Priya, who brought it to Ethan, and the three of them spent 2 sleepless days quietly tracing the signal, careful not to let anyone else on the project know what they suspected, in case they were wrong, and in case they were right. They were right. The signal, once decoded, was a short, careful report, describing the general location of the asteroid and a vague summary of the project's purpose, addressed to a contact whose identity the team could not immediately confirm, but whose payment history, buried deep in old financial records that Priya's brother, a quiet man who worked in banking security, managed to trace, led back to a shell company with known ties to Council intelligence contractors. Daniel Kessler was not a spy for the Vorak. He was a spy for the Council. Ethan called a private meeting with only his closest 4, Maya, Priya, Wen, and Aisha, in the small office deep inside the asteroid, and laid out what they had found. "He's been selling us out," Ethan said, his voice tight and controlled in the way that Maya had learned meant he was furious underneath. Not to the Vorak, to the Council. Probably some intelligence officer who suspected we were up to something after the New Halden protests got loud, and started paying informants to watch anyone with a background in weapons research. "How much does he know?" Priya asked. "Enough," Ethan said grimly. "He's seen the drive tests. He's seen the hull. If he sends one more report like the last one, with better details, the Council will know exactly what we're building, and exactly where to find it." "We can't let that happen," Wen said quietly. "We won't," Ethan said, "but we're not going to hurt him, and we're not going to do anything the Council could later call a crime, because if this project is ever discovered, I want humanity's hands to be as clean as they can possibly be. We confront him, we find out how much he's told them and who he's working with, and then we decide what comes next." They confronted Daniel Kessler that evening, in a small, quiet room with just Ethan and Maya present, and the young man's face went pale, and then blank, as the evidence was laid out in front of him. "I didn't want to," he said finally, his voice shaking. "They found out about my sister. She's sick, back on Earth, and the treatment she needs isn't covered, and they offered to pay for it, all of it, in exchange for information. I told myself I was only confirming rumors, that it wasn't really betraying anyone, that the Council already suspected something anyway." Ethan listened without interrupting, and when Daniel finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I understand desperation," Ethan said finally. "I've made hard choices myself, choices I still lie awake thinking about, but you put every person on this asteroid in danger, Daniel. You put everyone back on Earth in danger, because if the Council finds this place before we're ready, they won't just shut down one project. They'll use it as proof that humanity can't be trusted with anything, and they'll tighten every restriction they have." "What happens to me?" Daniel asked quietly. "You're leaving," Ethan said, "tonight. We'll make sure your sister's treatment is paid for, quietly, through channels the Council can't trace back here, because I'm not going to let a sick woman suffer for her brother's mistake. But you will never speak of this place again, to anyone, for the rest of your life. And we are moving. Everything. Tonight." It took 11 days of exhausting, careful work to relocate the entire project to a second, backup facility that Ethan had insisted on building a year earlier, buried inside a different, even more forgotten piece of rock on the far edge of the asteroid belt, a decision that had seemed like unnecessary caution at the time, and now felt like the only reason the project would survive at all. They left 4471 Kessler dark and empty behind them, its tunnels sealed, its equipment stripped and moved, every trace of human presence scrubbed away as carefully as they could manage. When Council investigators finally traced Daniel's last transmission and sent a quiet survey drone to check the location 3 weeks later, they found nothing but cold rock and old mining scars, decades out of date, and filed the report as an unconfirmed lead, one of hundreds their intelligence service chased and lost every year. The Umbra had survived its first brush with discovery, but everyone on the project understood, in the tense, quiet weeks that followed, that it would not be the last. The new facility, carved into an asteroid the team simply called Haven, was larger and better hidden than 4471 Kessler had ever been, built with every lesson learned from the near disaster with Daniel Kessler. No new members joined the project after the move. Every person who worked inside Haven's tunnels had been there since before the betrayal, tested by fear and exhaustion, and the long, hard work of rebuilding what they had already built once before. It brought them closer together in a way that surprised even Ethan, who had commanded soldiers before and knew what shared danger could do to a group of people. It took 8 more months to rebuild what they had lost, and then push past it. By the 3rd year since Ethan first laid a data drive on Maya's table, the Umbra sat whole and gleaming dark in Haven's main chamber, its long, smooth hull catching the soft white light of the cavern and swallowing most of it, giving back only a strange, dim shimmer that made the eye slide away rather than settle. "She's ready for her first real flight," Wen said one morning, standing beside Ethan in front of the ship, his voice carrying a note of nervous pride that made him sound younger than his years. Not just moving a few meters in the chamber, out, into open space. Ethan looked up at the Umbra's hull, tracing the smooth curve of it with his eyes. "How confident are you?" "Confident enough to fly it myself," Wen said. "Which I plan to do, if you'll let me." Ethan turned to look at him. "You built the drive, you know it better than anyone alive, but if something goes wrong out there, Wen, we lose you, and we lose the ship in the same afternoon." "If something goes wrong out there," Wen said quietly, "I want to be the one who understands why, so we can fix it. I'm not doing this because I'm brave, Commander. I'm doing this because I built the thing, and I trust my own work." Ethan looked at Maya, who gave a small, reluctant nod, and then at Priya, who crossed her arms and sighed before nodding as well. "Fine," Ethan said, "but you're not going alone. Aisha goes with you, on the shadow skin and sensor systems, and I'm flying the 3rd seat, because if this is the first time humanity's shadow ship flies free, I am not going to be sitting safe in a rock while it happens." 3 days later, in the cold quiet of the asteroid belt, far from any trade lane or council patrol route, the Umbra lifted off from Haven's main chamber for the first time, rising slowly and silently out through a wide, camouflaged opening in the rock, until it hung alone in open space, lit only by the distant light of a sun that was little more than a bright star from this far out. Inside the cockpit, a small, simple space with soft lighting and 3 seats. Wen's hands moved carefully over the controls, his breathing slow and steady despite the sweat on his forehead. "Drive is stable," he reported. "Power draw is within safe limits. Hull integrity holds." "We are..." He paused, checking the readout twice to be sure. "We are officially flying, Commander." Ethan looked out through the small viewport at the stars, at the vast, quiet dark surrounding them, and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 3 long years. "Aisha," he said, "what does the outside world see right now?" Aisha was watching a secondary screen, one linked to a small unmanned probe they had launched an hour earlier, positioned a safe distance away, and set to scan the Umbra, with the same kind of sensors a council patrol ship would use. "Nothing," she said, and there was quiet wonder in her voice. "The probe's radar shows empty space, with a faint smear of background noise, well within normal limits for asteroid debris. No heat signature beyond the ambient temperature of the rock we just left. No engine trail, no communication chatter." She looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes. "As far as any sensor in the galaxy is concerned, Commander, we are not here." Wen took the ship through a slow series of turns and short bursts of speed, testing the drive's response, watching every readout with the intense focus of a man watching his own child take its first steps. The Umbra moved like nothing any of them had ever flown before, not with the roar and shudder of a normal engine, but with a strange, smooth stillness, as if the ship simply decided where it wanted to be and arrived there, calm and unhurried, without ever quite seeming to travel the distance in between. "I want to try something," Wen said, after 20 minutes of careful testing. "A longer burst. See what real speed looks like." "Do it," Ethan said. Wen pushed the controls forward, and the drive ring beneath them hummed with a low, steady vibration, barely felt through the deck plating. The stars outside the viewport did not streak past the way they did in old films about space travel. Instead, they simply seemed to shift, positions changing in small jumps that the eye could barely track, as if reality itself was rearranging around the ship rather than the ship moving through it. "We just crossed roughly 200,000 kilometers, Aisha said, checking her instruments, her voice tight with excitement. "In under 4 seconds. And the probe still shows nothing. No signature at all." Ethan let out a slow breath. 3 years of work, 3 years of stolen sleep and cracked test panels, and one terrible betrayal. And here it was, finally real, finally flying, finally proof that the crazy idea scratched onto a data drive in a small office outside Denver had become something the galaxy had never seen before. "Take her home, Wen," Ethan said quietly, gently. "We've proven what we needed to prove today." News of the Umbra's successful first flight spread slowly and carefully through the small circle of people who knew the project existed, delivered encoded messages to Earth that spoke of nothing more dramatic than a successful equipment test, but that carried, underneath the careful language, the weight of everything they had been working toward. Lena Cho received her copy of the message in her private quarters on the human embassy station, 3 weeks after the flight, delivered by a courier she trusted completely, a young woman who worked in the embassy kitchens and had no idea what the small data chip she carried actually contained. Lena read it twice, sitting alone at her desk, and then sat very still for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling a strange mix of hope and terror settle into her chest. She had known about the project almost from the beginning. Ethan had come to her personally, a year into the work, because he needed someone inside the diplomatic system who could help protect the project from Council suspicion, without ever directly lying to the Council's face, a distinction that mattered more to Lena than most people would understand. She had spent the past 2 years quietly steering Council attention away from anything that might lead back to Haven, deflecting questions, delaying investigations, all while maintaining, in every official meeting, the calm, careful posture of a diplomat who had nothing to hide. It had been the hardest work of her career, harder even than her first year negotiating the terms of humanity's entry into Council space. Every lie of omission weighed on her. Every meeting where she smiled and nodded and said nothing about what she knew was happening out in the asteroid belt felt like a small betrayal of the trust the Council placed in her role. But she believed, as much as Ethan did, that the alternative, watching Earth's colonies burn while the combined fleet arrived too late, again and again, was worse than any lie she had to tell. She composed a careful reply, coded in the same simple language they always used, congratulating an old friend on a successful business venture, and sent it back through the same trusted courier. Then she sat alone in her quarters for a while longer, thinking about what would happen the day the Umbra finally had to fly somewhere that mattered, somewhere the whole galaxy would eventually learn about, one way or another. The Umbra's second test came sooner than anyone expected, and it came not as a planned exercise, but as an emergency. It began with a distress signal, picked up by Haven's own carefully hidden long-range sensors, an array Priya's team had built using the same principles as the shadow skin, able to listen without ever broadcasting anything that might give their location away. The signal came from a small human research outpost on a moon called Verdance, 6 days normal travel from Haven, a quiet scientific station studying local plant life with a population of only 40 people, none of them soldiers, none of them equipped with anything more dangerous than basic mining tools. A Vorak scout ship, smaller than the raiding fleets that had hit New Halden, but still more than enough to overwhelm an unarmed research station, had been detected approaching Verdance's system. The combined fleet's nearest response ship was 11 days away. Ethan read the intercepted distress call in Haven's small command room, surrounded by Maya, Wen, Priya, and Aisha, all of them silent, as the weight of the moment settled over the group. 11 days, Maya said quietly. The station won't last 11 hours, if that scout ship decides to attack, let alone 11 days. How fast can the Umbra get there? Ethan asked, already knowing the answer would matter more than anything else in the room. Wen ran the numbers quickly. At the speeds we tested, maybe 6 hours. Less, if I push the drive harder than we've tried before. But I can't promise the ring will hold at higher output without more testing. Ethan looked around the room at each of them in turn. This was the moment he had warned them about from the very beginning, the moment when the ship they had built in secret, meant only to defend and never to be seen, would have to decide what it was willing to risk being seen for. "If we go," Ethan said slowly, "and something goes wrong, if the Vorak scout ship gets a clear look at us, or if the drive fails under strain and leaves us stranded, the whole project could be exposed. Every person on this station's future safety could be gone in a single mistake." "And if we don't go," Priya said quietly, 40 people on Verdance die because we decided our secret was more important than their lives. That's not a choice, Ethan. Not really. Not for what this ship was built for." Ethan nodded slowly. He had known, from the very start, what his answer would be, the first time this choice actually came. He just hadn't expected it to come so soon. "When you're on the drive, Aisha, sensors and shadow skin monitoring. Maya, I want you on tactical, in case we need to think fast about how to handle the scout ship without giving away what we are." He paused, looking at Priya. "I need someone here, coordinating, keeping Haven safe if this goes wrong. That's you." Priya nodded, disappointed, but understanding. "Everyone else," Ethan said, raising his voice slightly, to be heard by the rest of the team gathered near the chamber entrance. "Get the ship ready. We launch in 20 minutes. The 6-hour flight to Verdance was the longest 6 hours of Maya's life. She sat in the tactical seat, running through scenario after scenario in her head, trying to plan for a fight the Umbra had never been fully designed to have. The ship had defensive systems, a set of short-range disruptor weapons that Priya's team had built quietly over the past year, powerful enough to disable a small scout ship's engines and weapons without destroying it outright, chosen specifically because a destroyed ship left wreckage that told a story, while a disabled ship, left drifting and confused, could simply be a mystery no one ever solved. "We're not here to fight a war," Ethan reminded everyone, as Verdance's small moon grew larger on the main view screen, a pale gray shape with the tiny lights of the research station, barely visible on its surface. "We're here to stop one ship from hurting 40 people, and to do it in a way that doesn't tell the galaxy who did it." "Scout ship confirmed," Aisha reported, watching her sensor readouts carefully. "It's holding position about 10,000 kilometers from the station, probably scanning for defenses before it commits to an attack. No sign it's noticed us yet. We're still reading as background noise, even this close." "Good," Ethan said. "When, bring us in slow, from the far side, away from its main sensor array. Maya, get me a firing solution on its engines and weapon systems, nothing that risks the hull." The Umbra slid silently through the dark, unseen and unheard, closing the distance to the Vorak scout ship with a patience that would have been impossible for any normal vessel, which would have needed to accelerate and decelerate in ways that gave away its intentions long before it arrived. The Umbra simply appeared, closer each time anyone checked, without ever seeming to have crossed the space in between. "Firing solution ready," Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension in the small cockpit. "Fire," Ethan said. The Umbra's disruptor beams lanced out silently through the dark, striking the Vorak scout ship's engines and main weapon array in 3 precise, controlled bursts. On the view screen, the enemy ship's running lights flickered and died, its engines going dark, leaving it drifting, powerless and confused, still 10,000 kilometers from Verdance's helpless research station. There was no explosion, no wreckage, no dramatic battle that anyone on Verdance's surface would ever see or understand. One moment the Vorak scout ship had been a silent threat approaching in the dark. The next, it was simply broken, drifting, its crew alive but stranded, with no idea what had struck them, or where the attack had come from. "Target disabled," Maya reported, her voice shaking slightly with released tension. "No return fire, no sign they detected our position before or during the engagement." Ethan let out a long, slow breath, looking at the small, dark shape of the disabled scout ship on the view screen. "Take us home," he said quietly. "Verdance is safe." As the Umbra turned silently away, sliding back into the vast dark of open space, unseen by the 40 terrified but unharmed researchers still huddled in their station's shelter far below, unseen by the drifting Vorak crew who would spend the next several days repairing their engines with no memory of what had truly attacked them, Ethan allowed himself, for the first time in 3 years, to feel something close to satisfaction. The Umbra had flown, the Umbra had fought, and the Umbra had disappeared back into the shadows, exactly as it was always meant to. But somewhere far behind them, on a Council intelligence station that monitored border traffic across a dozen systems, a very small, very strange sensor anomaly, recorded automatically and almost dismissed as equipment error, had just been flagged for a closer look. The Council intelligence officer who first noticed the strange sensor anomaly near Verdance was a quiet, careful being named Threll Vasco, a member of a species called the Odri, known throughout the Council for their patience and their almost obsessive attention to detail. Threll had spent 11 years analyzing sensor data from the border regions near human space, and in that time had developed a reputation for catching things that everyone else dismissed as noise. The anomaly itself was small. A brief flicker in a routine long-range scan, recorded by an automated relay station near the edge of the Verdance system, showing a disturbance in local gravity readings that lasted less than a second and then vanished completely. Most analysts would have filed it as sensor error and moved on, because the galaxy was full of strange, unexplained readings that never repeated and never mattered. But Threll noticed something else buried in the same data. A Vorak scout ship, previously tracked approaching the Verdance system with clear hostile intent, had gone dark at almost the exact same moment as the gravity anomaly, its engines shutting down completely, leaving it drifting for 6 days before its crew managed a slow, limping repair and retreated back across the border. There was no record of any combined fleet ship in the area. There was no record of any weapon fire, any explosion, any of the normal signatures that came with a ship being disabled in combat. Something had stopped that Vorak ship. Something that left almost no trace at all. Threll spent the next 3 months, quietly pulling every scrap of sensor data from every station near human space, going back years, looking for other unexplained anomalies that might connect to the same pattern. It was slow, careful work, the kind that most of his colleagues found tedious, but Threll had always believed that the most dangerous things in the galaxy were the ones nobody else bothered to look for. He found 4 more incidents. A pirate vessel near a human mining colony, disabled under mysterious circumstances 2 years earlier. A Vorak probe near the edge of the border, destroyed with no clear cause 18 months before that. 2 smaller anomalies, fainter readings that might have meant nothing on their own, but that fit a pattern once Threll laid all 5 incidents out on a timeline and looked at them together. Every single incident had occurred near human space. Every single incident had involved a threat to human colonies or human interests. And every single incident had left almost no trace behind, except for a faint gravitational flicker that no known technology in Council space could explain. Threll brought his findings to his superior, a senior Council intelligence director named Casimir Doran, in a private meeting held in a secure office, 3 levels below the main Council hall. "You believe the humans are responsible," Casimir said, studying the timeline Threll had prepared, his voice carefully neutral. "I believe someone is protecting human interests using technology this Council has never seen," Threll said. "Whether that is the humans themselves, or some unknown third party acting on their behalf, I cannot yet say with certainty. But the pattern is too consistent to be coincidence, Director. 5 incidents, all near human space, all involving threats to human safety, all disabled or destroyed by something our sensors could not properly detect." Casimir was quiet for a long moment, tapping one long finger against the edge of his desk. "The humans were banned from building warships nearly 3 years ago. If they have somehow built something that violates that ban, and worse, something that violates it in a way designed specifically to avoid our detection, that is not a minor infraction, Threll. That is a direct challenge to the authority of this entire Council." "I understand the seriousness, Director. Do you have any idea what this technology might be? Any theory at all?" Threll hesitated. "The gravitational readings are strange, consistent with a drive system that moves through space without conventional propulsion. If such a thing exists, and if the ship using it is built from a material that scatters our sensors the way these readings suggest, then we may be dealing with a vessel that is functionally undetectable by any current Council technology, a ship the Council cannot see." Casimir's expression did not change, but something in his posture grew very still. "Find it," he said quietly. "Find proof, Threll. Quiet proof, gathered carefully, without alerting the humans that we suspect anything. If they have truly built something like this, The Council needs to know before it decides what to do about it, not after. Word of increased Council attention reached Lena Cho 8 weeks later, delivered through the careful network of contacts she had built over years of diplomatic work. And it reached her, not as a formal accusation, but as a quiet, worrying shift in the tone of every meeting she attended. Council officials who had once been merely cautious around her grew watchful. Questions that had once been routine, about human shipyard activity, about mining operations in the outer asteroid belts, about the movement of human personnel with engineering backgrounds, began to carry a sharper edge. She sent an urgent, carefully coded message to Ethan the same night she noticed the pattern, using a method they had never used before, reserved only for true emergencies. Ethan read the message alone in his quarters at Haven, his stomach tightening with every line. Lena believed, based on the pattern of questions and the sudden increase in Council survey drone activity near the outer asteroid belt, that someone in Council intelligence had connected the Umbra's quiet interventions to a possible human technology violation. She could not be certain how much they knew, but she was certain of one thing. They were looking, and they were looking carefully. He called an emergency meeting of the project's core team within the hour. "We knew this day might come," Ethan said, standing at the head of the small conference table in Haven's command room, looking at the tired, worried faces around him. "We built this ship to defend our people, and every time we used it, we accepted the risk that someone, eventually, would notice a pattern in the things that kept happening near human space that shouldn't have been possible. It looks like that day has arrived." "What do we do?" Aisha asked. "Stop flying missions? Wait for the attention to die down?" "We can't stop protecting people," Maya said firmly. "Not after everything we've built this for. If we go dark now, out of fear, we're no better than the Council was, hiding behind caution while people suffer." "I agree," Ethan said. "But we also can't be careless. From this point forward, every mission gets planned, with the assumption that someone might be watching for exactly the kind of gravitational signature our drive produces. We fly less often. We fly further from any known Council sensor station when we can help it. And we prepare, seriously, for the possibility that one day, despite everything we do, they find us anyway." "Prepare how?" Wen asked. Ethan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "We prepare for the day we might have to stop hiding," he said finally. "Not because we want to, but because if the Council finds this ship on their own terms, discovers it through spies and suspicion and fear, they will see exactly what they always feared humanity might become. A species that builds secret weapons and lies about it. But if we are ever forced to reveal the Umbra ourselves, on our own terms, at a moment when its purpose is undeniable, when everyone can see with their own eyes that it was built only to save lives, that is a very different story. That is the story we need to be ready to tell, if the day comes when we no longer have a choice." The room was silent, the weight of what he was suggesting settling over each of them in turn. "You're talking about someday flying the Umbra out in the open," Priya said slowly, "right in front of the Council." "I'm talking about being ready for that possibility," Ethan said. "Not choosing it lightly, not choosing it unless we have to, but being ready, because I would rather humanity control how this story is told than let fear and suspicion tell it for us." Threll Vasco's search for proof continued for another 5 months, careful and patient, exactly as Casimir Doran had asked. He requested quiet increases in survey drone activity across the outer edges of human space, disguised as routine mapping updates, careful never to concentrate too heavily on any one area that might draw attention. He cross-referenced years of shipping manifests, personnel records, and old research project files, slowly building a list of human engineers and scientists who had once worked on projects that seemed, in hindsight, strangely relevant to the technology he suspected existed. A failed faster-than-light drive experiment, shut down years earlier. A materials science project involving an unusual mining accident, also shut down. A handful of names that appeared in both. Engineers who had vanished from public record around the same time, their official employment listed as routine and unremarkable, but whose actual whereabouts, when Threll dug deeper, proved surprisingly difficult to confirm. He found Wen Zhao's name. He found Priya Nandan's name. He found, eventually, a thin thread connecting both of them to a small, defunct mining company, with claims on a scattering of unremarkable asteroids in the outer belt, one of which, according to old records, had been quietly abandoned 3 years earlier, after what the company's paperwork described as a failed survey. It was not proof, not yet, but it was enough to bring to Casimir Doran with real confidence. "I believe I have located the origin point," Threll said, laying out his findings in the same secure office. Months of careful work condensed into a single, careful presentation. An asteroid, designated 4471 Kessler, abandoned according to official records but showing signs of extensive excavation when I requested updated survey imagery. It matches the profile of a hidden facility, capable of supporting the kind of project I believe we are looking for. Casimir studied the images carefully. "It looks abandoned." "I believe it was abandoned," Threll said, "deliberately, and likely in some haste, roughly 2.5 years ago. I believe the humans grew concerned about discovery, and relocated their operation to a second, as yet unknown location. This asteroid may be empty now, but it proves the project is real, Director. It proves the humans have been building something in secret, in direct violation of the warship ban, for at least 3 years." Casimir was quiet for a long time, staring at the images of the abandoned tunnels carved into cold gray rock. "This changes things," he said finally. "This is no longer a matter for quiet investigation, Threll. This needs to go before the full council. But we need more than an empty asteroid and a theory about missing engineers. We need to find where they went. And we need to do it before the humans have any reason to suspect we are close. Because if they realize we know, they may hide this technology so deeply that we never find it at all. And a weapon this council cannot detect, in the hands of any single species, is the single greatest threat to galactic stability that I have encountered in my entire career." "Understood, Director. I will continue the search." "Do more than continue," Casimir said, standing from his desk, his voice hardening with a resolve that had not been there before. "Whatever resources you need, you will have. I want this ship found, Threll. Before humanity decides to use it for something the galaxy cannot forgive." 3 weeks later, the Vorak did something no one on either side of the growing quiet investigation had expected. They stopped raiding in small scattered groups along the border, and began, instead, to gather. Human long-range sensors, along with combined fleet monitoring stations, detected the buildup first. Dozens of Vorak warships assembling near a staging point just beyond the border, far more than any single raid had ever required. Council analysts, still cautious after years of underestimating Vorak coordination, watched the buildup grow for 2 tense weeks, before finally reaching a grim consensus. This was not a raid. This was the beginning of a full invasion, aimed squarely at human colony space, and possibly, if the fleet's numbers continued to grow, at the combined fleet's forward bases as well. Ethan received the news at Haven within hours of the first council alert reaching human channels, delivered by Lena in a message far less coded and far more urgent than any she had sent before. He read it standing in the command room, Maya beside him, the rest of the team gathering slowly, as word spread through Haven's tunnels. "How many ships?" Maya asked quietly, reading over his shoulder. "Estimates range from 60 to over 100, Ethan said, his voice tight. "Growing every day, the buildup continues. The combined fleet has maybe 30 ships that could reach the border in time to help, and most human colonies out there have nothing at all to defend themselves with. Exactly like the council promised us would never happen." "What does Lena think the council will do?" Priya asked. "She thinks they'll authorize the combined fleet to make a stand," Ethan said, "and she thinks it won't be enough. Not against a fleet that size. Not without help. Nobody in council space is prepared to offer." He looked up from the message, around the room, at the exhausted, frightened, determined faces of the people who had spent 3 years of their lives building something the galaxy had never imagined, for exactly this kind of moment. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is the day we always knew might come. The Umbra was built to defend our people when no one else could. I don't think we can hide anymore. I don't think we should." No one in the room spoke for a long moment. Then Maya, her voice steady despite everything, asked the question that mattered more than any other. "What do you need from us, Ethan?" He looked at her, and then at each of them in turn, and felt, for the first time since New Halden had burned, something that was not quite hope, but was close enough to hold on to. "I need everyone ready," he said, "because in a few days, one way or another, The whole galaxy is finally going to see what humanity built while they weren't looking. The council chamber had never been so full. Delegates from every member species crowded the high seats, their voices rising and falling in a dozen different translated tones, all of them arguing over maps and fleet numbers projected in the air above the central table. Lena Cho stood in her usual place, small and quiet among the noise, watching the growing panic with a calm she did not feel inside. The Vorek fleet had finished gathering. Scouts placed its numbers at 112 warships, more than double the size of any Vorek force ever recorded, moving now toward the border in a slow, deliberate advance that left no doubt about its target. Human colony space stood directly in its path, and beyond that, if the fleet was not stopped, 3 major combined fleet staging bases that supplied and supported every ship protecting that whole side of the galaxy. The combined fleet can muster 41 ships within range in time to meet them, said a council military officer, a broad, armored being from a species called the Kether, pointing at the projection with one heavy hand. 41 against 112. Even with our best tactics, our losses will be severe. We may slow them, we will not stop them. Then we withdraw the fleet, said another delegate, a thin, pale being whose translated voice carried a note of cold practicality that made Lena's jaw tighten. We consolidate our defenses at the staging bases and accept the loss of the outer human colonies. It is a hard choice, but it is the choice that preserves the greatest number of council lives. Those colonies hold over 200,000 human civilians, Lena said, her voice cutting through the murmur of agreement that had started to spread among the delegates. You are speaking of abandoning them to slaughter and calling it strategy. We are speaking of survival, Ambassador, the pale delegate replied, not unkindly, but not with any real warmth either. This council cannot save everyone. It never could. That is a truth your species has been slow to accept, ever since we asked you to accept certain limits for the good of us all. Lena wanted to shout at him, wanted to remind every delegate in that chamber that the limits placed on humanity had left those very colonies without any way to defend themselves in the first place. But before she could speak again, the chamber's main doors opened, and Casimir Doran walked in, flanked by Threll Vasco, both of them carrying the kind of grim urgency that silenced even the loudest arguments. Council elders, Casimir said, his voice carrying easily across the sudden quiet. Before this body makes any decision regarding the human colonies, there is a matter of intelligence that must be brought before you. A serious matter, concerning a possible violation of the warship ban. Lena's stomach dropped. She kept her face still, her hands folded in front of her, and said nothing at all. For the past several months, Casimir continued, my office has investigated a pattern of unexplained incidents near human space, incidents in which threats to human interests were disabled or destroyed by unknown means, leaving behind only faint traces our sensors cannot fully explain. We believe humanity has secretly developed a vessel using technology that circumvents council detection entirely. A ship this council cannot see. The chamber erupted into noise, dozens of voices rising at once, alarm and anger mixing together in a chaos of translated words. Lena stood very still at the center of it, feeling the weight of every eye that turned toward her. Ambassador Cho, the lead counselor said, once the chamber had quieted enough to be heard, its light band flickering rapidly, with what Lena had learned, over years of practice, to recognize as genuine alarm. Do you have knowledge of this project? Lena looked at Casimir, at Threll, at the sea of alien faces watching her, waiting for either a confession or a denial that would decide, in that single moment, whether humanity's fragile place among the stars survived the next few minutes. She thought of Ethan, 3 years ago, sitting across a table with a data drive between them. She thought of New Halden and Verdance and the 200,000 people about to be abandoned to a fleet no one could stop. And she made her choice. Council elders, she said, her voice steady and clear, I do have knowledge of this project. I have known of it for some time, and I chose not to disclose it, because I believed, and I still believe, that humanity built it, not to threaten this council, but to protect our people from exactly the kind of failure this chamber is discussing right now. A failure this council has already shown, at New Halden, that it is capable of. The chamber fell into stunned silence. You admit to this deception, the lead counselor said slowly. I admit to protecting my people, Lena said. the same way this council claims it wishes to protect the galaxy. And I would ask this chamber, before you decide how to punish humanity for building a way to defend itself, to first decide what you intend to do about the 112 Vorak warships currently bearing down on 200,000 innocent lives, because that is the crisis in front of you right now, not the ship you have only just learned might exist. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. Then, quietly, almost too quiet for the translation devices to catch clearly, the lead counselor asked the question that changed everything. Ambassador Cho, can this ship help stop the Vorak fleet? Lena held the counselor's gaze, and for the first time in 3 long years of careful lies and careful silences, she allowed herself to hope that the truth, finally spoken, might do more good than the secret ever had. I believe it can, she said, if this council is willing to allow it to try. The message reached Haven 4 hours later, relayed through Lena's fastest secure channel, carrying words that Ethan had hoped for, and feared in equal measure, for 3 long years. The council knew about the Umbra. Lena had told them, in open chamber, in front of every delegate. And in the chaos that followed, faced with a Vorak fleet no combined fleet force could stop alone, the council had done something Ethan never truly believed they would do. They had asked for help. They're not arresting us, Maya said, reading the message over his shoulder, disbelief plain in her voice. They're asking us to fight. They're desperate, Ethan said quietly, desperate enough to set aside 3 years of fear, at least for now, because the alternative is watching 200,000 people die, while they argue about whether we broke their rules. He looked up from the message, at the small crowd of exhausted, determined faces gathered in Haven's command room, people who had given 3 years of their lives to a secret project that was, in this single moment, no longer a secret at all. This changes everything, Priya said. If we fly out there now, in the open, in front of the whole combined fleet, in front of every council observer watching this battle, there's no going back to hiding. Everyone will know what we built. I know, Ethan said, but I think that's exactly what has to happen. We built this ship because the council's promises failed us. Now we have a chance to prove, in front of the whole galaxy, exactly what humanity can do when we're finally allowed to defend ourselves. Not as a threat, as a shield. He paused, looking around the room. I won't order anyone to fly this mission. Everyone here has already risked more than most people ever will. But I am asking, one more time, for whoever is willing, to help me take the Umbra out into the open, for the first time, and make sure 200,000 people get to see tomorrow. Wen was the first to speak. I built the drive. I'm flying it. I'm not letting either of you go without proper sensor and shield support, Aisha said. Someone needs to run tactical, who actually understands what that ship can do, Maya said, already moving toward the door. Priya looked around the room, at the crew assembling with quiet, steady determination, and allowed herself a small, tired smile. Go, she said. I'll keep Haven ready, in case you need somewhere to come home to. The Umbra reached the border 6 hours later, sliding silently out of the deep dark of open space, to find a battlefield already forming. The combined fleet's 41 ships, arranged in a defensive line, between the advancing Vorak fleet and the outer human colonies, small and outnumbered, and grimly determined to hold as long as they could. Combined Fleet Command, this is the Umbra, Ethan said, opening a careful, one-way channel to the fleet's lead ship, using a simple, direct human voice, instead of any council communication protocol, because there had been no time to build anything more formal, and because he wanted the first words spoken by this ship, in the open, to be plainly and unmistakably human. We are here to help. Please hold your line. We will take the flank. There was a stunned pause on the other end, and then a voice, translated but carrying real raw relief, replied, Umbra, this is Combined Fleet Command. We see nothing on our sensors. Confirm your position. You won't see us, Ethan said. That's rather the point. Watch the enemy's flank, Fleet Command. You're about to see why. The Vorak fleet came on fast and confident. 112 warships spread wide across the dark, their commanders no doubt expecting an easy victory against a defensive line less than half their size. What they did not expect, what nothing in their long history of raiding and warfare had ever prepared them for, was a single ship sliding silently along their flank, invisible to every sensor they possessed, carrying weapons built by a species that had spent 3 years perfecting exactly this kind of quiet, devastating precision. Target lock on their command ship, Maya said, watching the Vorak formation on the Umbra's tactical display. If we take that out first, their coordination falls apart. Their fleet doctrine relies heavily on centralized command. Do it, Ethan said. Non-lethal if we can manage it. I want their commanders alive to see who stopped them. The Umbra's disruptor beams lanced out silently, striking the Vorak command ship's engines and weapon systems in 3 precise bursts. The massive vessel, easily the largest ship in the entire Vorak fleet, went dark and drifted, its shields flickering and dying, its weapons falling silent, all without a single visible attacker for its confused, panicking crew to identify or return fire against. Chaos spread through the Vorak formation almost immediately. Ships that had relied on their command vessel for coordination began breaking into smaller, disorganized groups, some pressing forward out of habit, others slowing in confusion, unsure what had struck their flagship or where the threat had come from. Now, Fleet Command, Ethan said over the open channel. Their coordination is broken. Push your line forward while they're confused. The combined fleet, seasoned soldiers despite their outdated tactics against a fleet this large, seized the opening without hesitation, pressing their defensive line into a controlled counterattack against the suddenly disorganized Vorak ships. And through it all, the Umbra moved silently along the edges of the battle, striking engines and weapon systems on ship after ship, never destroying, never lingering long enough to be traced, appearing and disappearing, like exactly what its builders had named it, a shadow, moving through a battle that increasingly made no sense to the enemy caught inside it. 15 enemy ships disabled, Aisha reported, her voice tight with focus as she tracked the Umbra's growing tally. Combined fleet reports minimal losses. The Vorak formation is breaking apart. The battle lasted just under 3 hours, and by its end, the once massive Vorak invasion fleet, thrown into chaos by an enemy they could never see, had scattered into a disorganized retreat, leaving behind more than 30 disabled ships and a shaken, confused fleet command that would spend years afterward trying to understand what force had truly stopped them at the border that day. The combined fleet held. The human colonies stood untouched, and 200,000 people who had gone to sleep the night before, believing they might not see another sunrise, woke instead to news of an impossible, unexplained victory. The council chamber, when Ethan finally stood inside it 3 weeks later, felt very different from the way Lena had once described it to him. A place of cold, careful judgment, built for beings who did not fear the way humans did. Today, it felt smaller somehow, quieter, filled with delegates who watched him with a mixture of caution and something that had not been there before, something close to respect, though none of them would have used that word out loud just yet. Commander Cole, the lead counselor said, its light band steady and calm. This council has spent the past 3 weeks reviewing the full record of the Umbra project, its history, its actions, and its role in the recent defense of human colony space. We have also reviewed, at length, the actions of the combined fleet at New Halden, and the failures that led humanity to feel it had no choice but to act as it did. Ethan said nothing, waiting, his hands steady at his sides in the same way Lena had once trained herself to stand. There will be consequences, the counselor continued. Humanity did violate the terms of the warship ban, deliberately and knowingly, for a period of 3 years. This council cannot simply overlook that violation, regardless of the outcome. There will be a formal reprimand and a period of closer oversight regarding future human technology projects. I understand, Ethan said quietly. However, the counselor said, and something in its tone shifted. This council has also been forced to reconsider the assumptions that led to the original ban. We restricted humanity's warships because we feared what your species might become, with power we could not control. What we witnessed at the border 3 weeks ago was not a species reaching for conquest. It was a species choosing, again and again, over 3 years of secret operations, to use extraordinary power only in defense, only to protect the innocent, even when doing so risked everything you had built. That is not the behavior this council feared. That is the behavior this council should have trusted from the beginning. Ethan felt something in his chest loosen. 3 years of tension finally beginning to ease. This council, the lead counselor continued, will be revising the terms of humanity's warship restrictions. Full details will follow in the coming months, but I can tell you now that the total ban you have lived under for 3 years will not continue in its current form. Humanity has earned the right to defend itself, Commander Cole. What remains to be decided is how, and under what shared understanding, that right will be exercised going forward. Ethan bowed his head slightly, a gesture he had practiced with Lena beforehand, and allowed himself, for the first time in that cold, bright chamber, a small, tired smile. On behalf of everyone who built the Umbra, he said, and everyone who chose to trust that it would only ever be used to protect, thank you, Council Elders. We did not build a weapon to threaten this galaxy. We built a shield, because when the moment came, no one else was ready to hold it for us. We hope from here forward that we will not need to build in secret again. Back on Earth, in the small office outside Denver where this had all begun 3 years earlier, a new sign had been placed on the door, simple and quiet, the way Ethan had always preferred things. It did not say Human Fleet Command. It said, instead, Human Defense Initiative, and beneath it, in smaller letters, a phrase Maya had suggested, and everyone had agreed on without argument. Built in the dark, flown in the light. The Umbra itself, still the only ship of its kind, sat now in a proper shipyard for the first time in its short life, no longer hidden in a forgotten asteroid, but openly acknowledged, openly discussed, the subject of careful new agreements between Earth and the Council about what humanity would be permitted to build going forward, and what oversight that building would require. It was not everything Ethan had once hoped for. There were still limits, still watchful eyes, still careful negotiations ahead, but it was no longer secret, no longer something humanity had to hide out of fear, and for the first time in 3 long years, that felt like enough. Maya stood beside Ethan at the shipyard viewing window, looking out at the Umbra's smooth, dark hull, no longer swallowed by shadow, but standing proudly in open light, a shape the whole galaxy now knew by name. We did it, she said quietly. We did, Ethan agreed. But this isn't the end, Maya. It's the start of something new. A new way for humanity to stand among the stars. Not hidden, not banned, but trusted. Because we proved we could be trusted. Far out past the edge of human space, near colonies that had once stood defenseless against raiders, and now slept a little easier at night, word of the shadow ship that had saved them spread quietly from person to person, growing, as such stories always do, into something larger than the simple truth of one ship and one crew, who had chosen, over and over, 3 years of secrecy, to build something not to conquer the stars, but to protect the people who called them home. And somewhere in a quiet shipyard, under a clear blue sky, the first ship of its kind sat ready for whatever came next, no longer a secret, no longer a shadow, but a symbol of exactly what humanity had always been capable of building, when it was finally given the chance to try. The end.